Oh, sorry.
And that's the intro music to our brand new intro music to our show.
Oh God.
Welcome back to the Trampled Underfoot podcast show, everybody. Your hosts, Mark Lindsay and Eloy Escajero. What's going on, Mark?
It's been a week. I mean, I ain't kidding you. I know you look forward to this time of year, but we're not even to Christmas yet, and I'm tired of rain already. You know, it's I've still got leaves. I don't want to rake them. I because they're soaking wet, and I don't know. You ever have to rake up wet leaves? I mean, massive
I
amounts.
I have done.
It's not fun. It's just, and I'm like, no, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that now. But it's looking like I'm gonna have to because I've got like 3 more days until they come pick up leaves. So got to get it done.
Um, it's been a pleasant temperature here for the past few days, with chilly weather in the 70s.
Chilly in the 70s, I would take that. I mean, I can't really complain. We don't get super cold here. It's been in the 50s during the day. It's 50 right now. So I really can't complain too awful bad. It doesn't mean I have to like it, but I really don't have anything to complain about.
I'm surprised that um, San Francisco, which I remember as brutally cold, it
Mhm.
gets warmer the further north you go.
Well, the thing about San Francisco is the humidity there. It's just as humid as it is in Miami because they're right there on the bay. The problem is the wind comes out of the northwest off of Alaska. So it's a cold wind. And with the humidity as high as it is, it just chills everything. And yeah, it may be 51 degrees, but with the wind, it feels like it's 25. So,
When I was out there visited,
mhm.
it was just so cold. I
Mhm.
wasn't, I mean, Chicago was colder,
Yeah.
but boy, San
Well,
Francisco was chilly.
and that's the difference because you get up around Chicago, Minnesota, Wisconsin. Um, it's the humidity is lower, much lower. It's a lot drier, and but you get in that real high humidity. I mean, you get fog um, every morning anyway, and fog is 100% humidity, and that fog comes rolling in off of the ocean and just stays there. And you've got, zero visibility. You can't see the hood of your car. You're not going anywhere. And it gets that way here on occasion, not very often anymore. We used to get sucked in like that quite a bit. But I mean, they're closing schools and everything else because you just can't see to go anywhere. And
Yeah.
it's surreal as hell. I don't know. Does it get foggy there? I wouldn't imagine it does.
Once in a blue moon, it will get foggy and it'll clear up as the day progresses.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it sometimes clears up here. I mean, I remember back in the late 70s, early 80s, we had a 28-day stretch where they consider visibility of less than a quarter of a mile, they consider that zero visibility. We had a 28-day stretch where it was zero visibility 24/7.
Damn.
There was a temperature inversion, and that's something that you, I'm sure, don't deal with, and that is the air down here in the valley was colder than the air up in the mountains, and that kind of creates a miniature high pressure dome that keeps that fog force down in the valley and keeps it cold because the sun can't burn through. And it was 28 days straight, and I mean, people were going nuts. you know
Damn. Like the movie The Fog.
yeah, I mean, you step out of your door and you can't see the end of your driveway, and that's when it was decent. If when it was at its worst, you couldn't see your driveway. 6, 8, 10 feet, and it was just a white smudge. So that's why it is a very real thing. 4th of July in San Francisco, the fog come rolling in off of the ocean, and you just sat in the bleachers and watched the fog change color. They'd still launch the fireworks, but you couldn't see it. You just saw that something all of a sudden flashed blue or flashed red. And like dummies, we did it.
I mean, there's no choice, you know.
Yeah.
You got all this good explosives. You got to get
Yeah.
rid of it somehow.
Things go better with boom. I mean, that was about it. Well, that was pre internet. So, and even the stuff on TV wasn't worth watching because even the networks, they knew that everybody was out, blowing off fireworks or going to a firework display or something like that. Ain't nobody in the house now.
The internet has changed a lot of things
Hmm. Oh, big
in
time.
ways that we may not process, but like at any given moment. But things like you just said, I mean, there's so many, and I don't want to go into something that we've already gone into roughly, but we do that anyhow. But the access to information that I have
Hmm.
is
It's crazy.
is crazy.
Yeah, it's absolutely nuts. And
Yeah,
not even information, just think of entertainment. You can get on YouTube, amongst other places, but you can get on YouTube and you can watch the New Year's fireworks in Sydney, Australia. And then
yeah.
you can watch the fireworks in Paris or London or wherever. And then getting prepared for your own local display. And then I can watch the fireworks in Miami. And if you really want to, you can watch them somewhere out here, Vegas or LA or Portland or Seattle or what have you. It's just crazy the amount of entertainment that we have available to us. So,
I
if
remember
our fireworks show is a dud, I can watch yours.
it reminds me of like a few years ago. I woke up particularly early and I stepped out, and the
Mhm.
sky. I've told you this before, but like this, like the lighting out, it was orange. Everything was, and I ran back in quick and I grabbed my camera and I started filming stuff, and I was so I was so enthralled with it. It's all orange. And I did a video. I recorded it and I put it out, and in the video you hear me, look at this. The skies are orange, isn't that? And then I realized that yeah, that's called sunrise, you know. And
Yeah,
the
but for somebody that doesn't experience it that often, it is odd. I mean, I can
there's
remember when the Northern Lights, when we were living in Nevada and we hadn't been living there that long, the Northern Lights was visible far enough south that we could see them. And I genuinely did not know what the hell it was, And when I finally figured it out, I took off over to my parents' house, got my dad out on the front porch because I knew he was interested in that kind of stuff. And I mean, we sat out, I was still at work, I was on call at radio dispatched, but we sat out there in their front yard and just, wow, this is awesome. And people further up north are going, yeah, it happens every night. Not around here, it don't.
that's got to be something interesting and breathtaking to
Yeah, it if you try to describe it to somebody, they'd think you're lying. You really have to see it.
it's almost like a hologram, you know, those
Yeah.
baseball cards that are holograms,
Hmm.
and I mean not exactly, but it's got that sort of translucent shifting of lights.
That's probably the closest way to describing it. Yeah, is something like that. I mean, and uh, the way it started is I'm heading. I guess I was heading north through town, and I got out of the middle of town and kind of got out in the outskirts a little bit where there wasn't as much light, ambient light, and just there's a mountain. Carson City sits at the base of this mountain, and it looked like, I swear it looked like the backside of the mountain was on fire because it was just flame red, really bright. And I thought, what the hell is going on? And then suddenly it was up above the mountains as it came down south a little bit. it was up above the mountains, and I'm like, what the hell is this? And then the penny dropped, and I was like, oh, that's the aurora borealis. Holy hell. And that's when I scooted over and got my father out of the house.
The
So
other night or yesterday, I think it was, we had an orange moon,
mhm,
deep orange,
yeah.
and huge.
Hmm.
And instead of it being half and half, like vertically,
Hmm.
it was half and half horizontally.
Yeah.
It was so. I was walking my dog, and I looked up, and it was like it's so different. Like it leaves
Yeah.
an impression.
Hmm.
No wonder the ancients um like depicted such. Well, I mean, I don't know what the full story would be, but
Yeah.
calendars and this and that. But I'm sure it was one of the things that they would look at and say, "Whoa, we got to document this somehow."
Yeah.
You
I
know,
mean, if you spend any amount of time outside at all at night and you get away from city lights, get out in the woods where there's no light pollution, and you will see some weird stuff. Things that you really can't explain, but are very easily explained, but it's just like, holy heck. I mean, I think I told you about that. It was, oh gosh, I was 16 or 17. I was probably 17. And we were more or less camping out in my grandparents' front yard. They lived up on this hillside. And laying there on their lawn in my sleeping bag, just kind of looking up at the sky, a real dim light. Watched it just go above me. And I'm watching it. And I'm like, what the devil is that? It wasn't flashing lights like an aircraft or something like that. And it was just nice and steady, just went across the sky. And then suddenly it just kind of vanished, disappeared. I'm like, what the heck was that? I have no idea what that was, but it was just like a pinprick of light. And it was, oh, years later. Linda and I were married. We were back from Germany. We were in Nevada. My dad had bought a decent telescope, and he took us out to this little valley, this little airfield in this valley, and we set up the telescope. And he was pointing out, this is this globular cluster, and this is this star, and this is this. And my mom was looking through the telescope, and I'm just kind of looking up, and I saw another one. And I pointed at Dad, what is that? You see that moving up there? What is that? And he goes, oh, that's a satellite. I said, what? He said, yeah, that's a satellite. That's a reflection of the sun off the satellite. You'll see them around this time a night. And then as the sun, the earth rotates and the sun gets further down, you can't see them anymore because there's no sunlight to reflect off. You can see a satellite from this far down. He says, yeah, they're about 250 miles up. You're kidding me, right? And, started looking into it. And sure enough, that's what I had seen all those many years prior. But you couldn't see them unless it was, I mean, pitch black. You have to be in an area where there's no real light pollution. But if you didn't know what you were looking at, and now that I know what they are, there are certain times we can go out on our front deck, and so long as the neighbor doesn't have his front porch light on, we can spot them on occasion. Because there are millions of species that have better eyesight than us and better night vision than us. But one thing human eyes are very good at is spotting movement. And if something moves, you'll notice your eye will be drawn to it. That's how we're able to spot meteorites, falling stars, whatever you want to call them. But
yeah.
it's wild.
Well, we have another unique thing, which is our brain, which allows us to see that object
Hmm.
and then start contemplating. And and that's weird
Hmm.
that we're observant
Hmm.
in an analytical way.
Hmm.
We don't know what dogs think,
No.
but according to what people we've always thought is that we're the only ones that can actually go from a satellite,
Hmm.
that being a satellite, to lizard people.
Yeah.
Like
Well,
we're the only ones that would attach a plethora of different. You know what I'm saying? Like the mind, unlike other creatures and whatnot.
well, it's people trying to explain things they don't have an explanation for. And
Yeah.
we have the ability to decide whether that sounds logical to us or not.
But that's not a small thing.
No, it's not.
Yeah, like the fact that we, but it's also the cause of a lot of issues
Oh,
in
sure.
terms of like, no, that's not a freaking quarter pounder with cheese. That's just a regular burger. Well, wait a
Yeah,
second. Like I'm using that as an example, but
sure.
like you know what I'm saying? Just the fact that we can
Hmm.
analyze and be descriptive over it
Yeah,
is ripe with the possibility of argumentation and conflict over what the hell we're looking at or
yeah,
eating or whatever.
yeah. And but we've also got the ability, the consciousness to know that.
Yeah.
But sometimes that can also get us into trouble, or it'll lead us into directions where we never intended to go, be that good or bad. But then it can also lead us into meaninglessness, because there comes a point, especially numbers, as an example, there comes a point where numbers are just meaningless. You can't fathom how large that number actually is. Because, if you hear that, it's easy to say that worldwide M&M Mars Company makes 100 million M&Ms a day. We have no concept of what 100 million is.
No, my
Now,
concept of 100, just to interject,
yeah,
my concept of 100 million is a lot. And that's it.
yeah, exactly.
Like, oh, okay, he said 100 million, that means a lot. Now, that's not completely true, but the point is
Yeah,
basically at some point, like what you're saying,
yeah. I
it's
mean,
so much that,
I can visualize 100. I don't know if I could hold 100 M&Ms in one hand. I might need two, but I can visualize 100. But 100 million, and then that's per day. Okay, 365 days per year, and they've been doing it for 70, 80 years. The numbers just become meaningless up to when you get to a certain point.
they did a, I don't know if this is true,
Hmm.
but there was a little video that kind of talks about what you're saying in a different way.
Hmm.
And they were saying if you stacked X amount of dollars
Hmm.
in a straight line, I don't know what number he used, it'll reach the sky. Now, if you take the amount of debt that the country owes,
Hmm.
it's unfathomable. You could go to the moon and back
Yeah,
with the trillions like three and a half times or four times.
yeah.
If you were, that's what they said. Now, do I
Hmm.
know that that's true? I don't know that that's true because
Yeah,
there's a lot of variables there. But he showed so like let's say if it was true, that's a crap load of. Either way, a trillion is
hmm,
unfathomable.
yeah, yeah. It just, well, the number becomes meaningless because you can't visualize what that means. You know,
Yeah,
it's craziness, but
yeah.
you
Well,
know,
I do know what it means in terms of consequence in some aspects. If, and this is deviating from the main thing, but
sure.
if there's a debt of four or whatever trillion,
Hmm.
in my limited mind, the consequence that I focus on is that that debt is unpayable
Yeah,
ever.
yeah.
And if it's unpayable, I mean, I don't know that it's unpayable ever. It feels like it is. Um, because hell, try, try, try earning $100 and see how tough that is. Now imagine. So, anyways, but what it leads me to,
Even harder. Try keeping $100 after you've earned it.
well,
Go ahead.
yeah, well, but no, but the point is, that if that's the dad,
Well,
what does $100 in my pocket mean?
absolutely nothing. And that's what I mean when you get to that high a number. About the only thing it's good for is comparison. And you can say, well, a trillion is more than a billion. Okay, that's about all it's good for. Because how do you conceptualize?
I'll write you a
You really
check
can't. Yeah.
this
Will you
this
take the check?
evening. This evening, after all is said and done, I'm gonna
Hmm.
write you a check,
Hmm.
and it's gonna for 1 trillion, and I'm gonna write to post
Hmm.
date it to X date, and you can cash that puppy in once that.
Well, your first task is to find a bank that'll take it.
Well, no, that would be. I'm saying I'm the one writing it to
Yeah,
you.
exactly. That would be my first task would be to find a bank that would let me deposit it. Because
Yeah,
all
I
of
I
them would
need.
look at it and go, "Yeah, no, not us.
Yeah,
Sorry, dude."
I need a roll of pennies. Oh, and here's a check for.
Yeah, exactly.
See if you
Can
could
you
slip that in.
Yeah, can you break this 20? I need two fives and a 10. Oh, and I need to deposit this check. You know. Yeah, right.
When was the last time you grabbed a roll of pennies from the bank
Oh my god.
or quarters? You
The
know.
last time I got any kind of rolled coin from a bank. Okay, I'm going to count this as I can't count it as rolled. The last time I got rolled coin from a bank. Oh man, it was in the 1980s or 90s. It's been that long. Now, when I worked for that company working a slot machine route, we would
That was long.
order silver dollars, Eisenhower silver dollars for our dollar machines because we had them out on routes. They couldn't be casino tokens. They had to be the Eisenhower silver dollars. And we would order however many, $20,000 worth. And it would take them a week and then they'd get it and we'd go down there with cash and we'd buy them and it came in bags and then we'd have to put them in these red plastic racks of $100. And as we went through and we filled these racks, any old silver dollars that were silver, the boss would throw them in they were burlap sacks. They didn't quite have the dollar sign on them, but they had the name of the bank on them. And we'd throw them in that. And then, let's say, for the sake of argument, okay, we've got 28 silver dollars. So that's $3 a piece or $4 a piece, and everybody can pull out grab bag. Everybody, you pull out $4, and he would basically buy them from the company. We would buy them from the company. And you get 1921, 1922 silver dollars you could take down to the coin shop and sell for 8, 9, $10 a piece. So,
Yeah, I
but
still I still have a few. Actually, it's Eisenhower. You said
yeah, Eisenhower silver
I
dollars.
may have some Eisenhower. I definitely have Kennedy's.
Hmm. Well, that's a
I'd
half
have
dollar.
yeah, I'd have to check. Were the Kennedys
Hmm.
silver?
Pre 1960, I want to say 1964. I think it was 65. They went to the clad copper and zinc and a bunch of other different alloys. But so 64 and earlier were silver on the quarters, half dollars, and dollars. And used to get silver quarters all the time. Somebody tried to put one in a slot machine and they were slightly heavier. And the machine would read it as a slug. Hey, I can't get this. This machine won't take this quarter. Well, that's because it's silver. Well, you got another quarter? Sure. Reach into my pocket. I'd buy silver quarters all the time.
Yeah,
Then turn around and sell them to the pawn shop.
yeah,
No, you get $6, $7 for a silver quarter. That's fine. I mean, you're not going to retire on it, but
yeah. But a little here, a little there.
mm-hmm. It's like, dude, walk across the street to the pawn shop. They'll give you $6, $7 for it. No, I don't want to get up out of my chair here. I don't care. Okay.
Yeah, I have some. I think I even have a Cuban peso.
Yeah.
my that they my grandparents and parents collected or whatnot. So there's that.
Mhm. I don't know. I never really got into that a lot, but that was one thing when you deal with money all the time.
Hmm.
Yeah, it was strange. It was really really weird. I can tell you right now that $100,000 in $100 bills would easily fit into a quart-sized Ziploc bag. Okay, we'd get them in $10,000 bundles, and it's just 10 of those will easily fit in a quart-sized Ziploc bag. But I carried around money so much. To me, it was like a carpenter with a pouch full of nails. That's the way I thought of it. I mean, I'd leave the shop to go out on my route with 30, 40, $50,000 all the time, you know,
Random,
on me.
random. Now that we're talking about money,
Okay.
you know what irony is?
Hmm.
Irony is being stranded on a deserted island, miles and miles from home, with $100 million briefcases laid out on the beach.
Yeah.
You've got all the components,
Hmm.
but they don't fit in the right order, and that's the
Yeah.
definition of irony. Well, that's a way of defining irony.
Yeah.
Things that don't fit, that quite slightly miss,
Yeah.
that hit the wrong key.
Yeah. Just missed it by that much.
Yeah.
Jim Dockrell has a story himself. He said, he's up. Jim needs to know. Oh, folks need to know. Jim's up in Canada. Said the bar I worked at, we did U.S. dollars at par. Okay, so dollar for dollar. Put that dollar in our pocket and put a Canadian dollar in the till. Okay, yeah. Um, if customers complained about it, we told them to go get their drinks at the bank. Yeah, I mean, I've had limited experience in Canada, and the further you got out of town, the more common that was, because you had to think about, you know, the dude at a 7-Eleven across the street from the bank in the middle of, oh, Ottawa or, you know, wherever, one of the big cities. They're probably used to tourists and they probably know the exchange rate in their head and they can probably make the proper change. But the boss is going to go exchange that when they go to make their deposit. You get further out of town into the more rural areas and they got to go do that. They got to make a special trip to go exchange that and get their money back for it. So, I can see that. I got no complaints about that.
Yeah.
I mean, because he's right. This is a bar. This is not Chase Manhattan. So,
Yeah. Um, so we were talking before about Louisiana, and I want to throw this in.
oh, okay.
Actually, we were talking about it anyhow, so it's not throwing it at you. You already know, kind of, but let me see where
Well,
I can go.
sure.
So before we were talking about how I didn't know until just a few years back how connected I was to Louisiana. The way in which I'm connected, and by the way, this ties in with the fact that we have internet now, and we have access to all these things that we wouldn't have dreamt of before back in the day. Um, just we wouldn't have had the access.
Hmm.
So we're in a new place. All of us are, because I mean, hell, anything goes, right? Like if you want to learn about mechanics, yeah, you can. It would be good to go to a school, but if you were so inclined, you could get a leg up just by swimming in the waters of internet
Yeah.
information. Anyways, not to go too far, I wouldn't have known about this Louisiana thing, but it just so happens that by hook or crook, they gave me that communities tab, which says, "Hey, Eloy, you are linked to the Southern Louisiana da 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 community." I was like, "Southern Louisiana community," and I racked my brain in the beginning,
Hmm.
like, what the hell? And sure enough, I did have a lot of people pop up on the cousin matching where
Hmm.
they check and they see, oh, Eloy matches these stretches of DNA with these people that happen to be Louisiana people. And it's like, well, how could that be? Because my family basically arrived in the New World
Hmm.
within the past 100 years, 110 years, literally at the turn of the last century.
Yeah.
That's the history that I always knew. But I didn't account for there was a history prior to the history
Yeah.
where people traveled to the Americas for hundreds of years, and there were other consequences to those travels
Yeah.
where the DNA that would come to me when I was born was also spread out into a lot of people around the world, actually, but in particular in Louisiana, because in the 1700s they Spain sent people from the Canaries to populate Louisiana, because now Spain controlled Louisiana, um, and they wanted to keep a footing on it. You have to populate the area,
Yeah.
and so. But here's the thing: I don't know exactly yet, and it could either be that one of mine went there and back, or some crazy thing like that, or back and then to Cuba. I don't know. I don't know just yet. However, the point is that I have all these people that I talked to from a Canary Island thing, slash Louisiana group.
Hmm.
Um, and it's a whole new world that I wouldn't have even imagined in my mind if not for that DNA thing,
Hmm.
and then following up and actually reading books. So when you read, it's funny how that works. You learn new things, but the connection, the little pieces all together help you anchor a brand new pathway and stuff. And I
Hmm.
just found it really interesting. We were talking about that before, so I just threw it out here. I mean, what are your thoughts on
Well,
that, if any?
now, from what I understand, a lot of these people came through the Canary Islands, right? Or came from the Canary Islands.
There was a lot of them from the Canary Islands and some of them from Spain mainland.
Okay. Okay. Now, and they have set up, well, not set up so much, but they're basically in little pockets around the state. No doubt they've spread all over the state, but there are communities, small communities around the state, right? Still.
Yeah, there was a place that I think still exists called
Hmm.
Iberville,
Hmm.
which is Iberiaville.
Hmm.
And there was another place called Assumption Settlement, and another one called Don Donaldsville or something to that effect,
Hmm.
where they were places they tried to figure that was good land enough for them to do so.
Hmm.
And from those populations, they mixed with French people, with Scottish people, like with all sorts of people.
Sure.
And then they coalesced into a lot of the population of Louisiana has ancestry from various places.
Hmm.
I mean, so does
So.
everybody, but I'm saying in the case of me looking at
Hmm.
that, there's a particular Spanish slang. So yes, they're everywhere, even outside of Louisiana at this
Sure.
point. But the point is that mainly like southern Louisiana, let's say.
Now, have you ever thought about going, like, to any of the festivals or anything like that? Maybe go spend a few days there and check it out, see what it's like.
I mean, I've been to Louisiana, I've been to New Orleans. Um, I would go just for that. Yeah,
Hmm.
I would.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I know you said that you talked to some people there, or that
Yeah,
you have had communication with them there.
yeah,
That would be cool to go check out just to see.
yeah. There's if the Library of Congress,
Hmm.
they have photos and history. But I mean,
Oh,
Library
wow.
of Congress is a good source to go
Oh, yeah.
explore American and world history,
Oh, yeah.
um, which I do every now and then. It's really good source because they offer historical photos and all sorts of cool stuff.
And
Um, yeah,
and that's another example of the internet coming to the rescue, simply because it wasn't all that long ago
you had to go there.
that you had to actually go there. And my father and his brother took oh man, probably about a month long trip back east. And My uncle has a daughter, my cousin lives in North Carolina, and they went back and they stayed with her for a couple weeks and did a few things around there. And they spent probably a week in DC, and that's one of the things they did several times over the course of that week was they hit the Library of Congress researching, genealogy through the Library of Congress. There was a lot of family folklore about, ancestors that served during this war and that war, and they went there and basically tracked down all these records, and that's how I ended up. We have a copy of the paperwork. It would be my five times great grandfather. Yes, five times great grandfather. Uh, his Revolutionary War pension. He got a grand total of $91 a year, but back then that was a lot of money. So he was able to track down and get provenance for all of these and also disprove a few things that were in our family folklore that just somebody embellished a little too much and just changed the whole story. But
Yeah.
now you don't even have to go there. If it has been digitized, it's available. You just
Most
kind
of
of
it.
have
There's
to.
some stuff.
Well, there's a lot that has not been digitized, but you have to kind of know what you're looking for, and that's the main problem. I mean, you can't. You can go search for names, but there are so many. You need more than just names.
The equivalent of the Library of Congress is in Spain is the Royal Academy of History.
Hmm.
That's roughly translated.
Yeah.
And they have a vast, because it covers not just mainland Spain but all of the Americas. It has historical documents of the United States
Hmm.
and everything. So, and I don't, one doesn't have to go in order to investigate most of the records.
Hmm.
And the ones you can't get online that have not been digitized, you can order for a
Yeah.
fee or whatnot and stuff. But um, it would be cool. I don't know if the United States does or does not. I know they have sections like things on Hispanic history studies within the
Hmm.
Library of Congress and stuff, but um, all the different pieces. Um, I guess I, gue- I was thinking, like some sort of timeline with all the, like a interactive website would be so cool, so that one could just navigate and it's like a little
Yeah.
adventure, and you could go into Boston, and you can, and then they'll have lists of names of the people, key people, and you click in and it opens. See, I'm thinking, and it clicks in, and then you have the histories within the, like, cascading down into that, and then if what does that connect with some place in, I don't know, California, and, like, some sort of, that would be cool in the future.
Hmm.
I could see a more immersive history rolling out with technology,
Yeah.
where people could swim through history and acquire, and but see it in that interactive way. That would be really cool in the future, as opposed to now we have to hunt everything down.
Well, we're still in the infancy because, as we both mentioned, there a lot of this stuff isn't digitized yet, and getting it digitized is only the first step. Now you got to collate all that information. I mean, you can print out the dictionary page by page. Now you got to put each page into order. So, it all of it, the whole process takes a while. Now, if somebody is involved in a specific event or a specific area
Study.
of interest, like
Yeah.
the only reason we found grandfather John's Revolutionary War pension was because he was involved in the Revolutionary War. And there was a whole section dedicated to people who served at that time in the militias. So that's the only way we found him because it's okay, John Charles Lindsay. Yeah, really? Okay, pick a number. There's only about 30 million of them. You had to have more information on that. Well, he was at this age and he served at this time according to family folklore. Yes, we have record of that, and these are his sons according to his paperwork. Yes, that's him. Okay, here's the file on it. Here's what we have. But so much of that is still not even digitized. I mean, and for a fee you can get copies of all this stuff, and I think when they were back there, and we're talking about like 2013, 2014, they went back there. uh, it was like 25 cents a page. It was just a flat fee for how many pages. Okay, that's 6 pages, that's a buck and a half. Okay.
We used to go to the library
Mm.
and we, what did they call it? The not acetate. There's
Oh, microfiche.
the
Microfiche and microfilm. Yeah.
and we'd sit in those little machines
Hmm.
and scroll through papers and whatnot, and you could
Yep.
switch it so it's dark,
Hmm.
the opposite, just like
Hmm.
these people do, Family Tree.
Yep.
Um, and I remember the same when you wanted to print out a page,
Hmm.
you would set it to print or something, or you call the, I don't know, I forget the detail, but I
Yeah.
know you had to pay the fee, and they had a copier there, and then you'd copy it, or you
Hmm.
copied it. No, you'd copy what you needed, and you walk up to the front desk with the honor system, I think,
Hmm.
and she'd count it out and whatever the price and stuff like that.
Yeah.
That was back then.
Yep. In my local library, you had to find the page you want printed, then you called the librarian. She came over and she found the page, and then she would take that fish, microfiche, over to this printer that would blow it up and then print it out. And they charge you a quarter a page.
It's so much easier to
Hmm.
research now.
Oh yeah.
Like, I have, if I wanted to hone in
Hmm.
on the available knowledge over a historical scenario, I could do so
Hmm.
sitting right here. The key, as always has been, is to take various sources and get a layout of what the facts are, as
Yeah.
opposed to just going for a preferred,
Yeah.
um,
This book says this, therefore it must be so. Well, what do those 11 books over there say? Yeah.
right, to get a sort of, this and that.
You got to
But
collate it all. Yeah.
but the fact that you could do it at home,
Mhm.
for the most part, nine in my opinion, to throw out a number, 90%, 99%, or 90%. Let's not
Mhm.
exaggerate. Even that's probably an exaggeration, but about 90% you could do at home. I, from my seat at here, have been able.
Yeah.
I've even had surrogate genealogists in other places in other countries
Hmm.
actually go visit the places at my suggestion. My
Hmm.
my cousin did so. My other
Yeah.
cousin. So it's like a network, all from Sweetwater. It's hilarious,
Yeah.
dude.
The Sweetwater Network. Boom, boom, boom. Do,
Um,
do, 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 do.
yeah.
I had to throw that in there.
So um, so I'm gonna throw this is a little bit in the weeds, but I'll throw it out. Um, due to the fact that we have access to all these things and the specific areas that I study, which happens to be in the context of Spanish history, in the context of my personal history, but it branches out because there's always a cousin and another cousin and an uncle that maybe would have ended up in another, and so you end up reading about Louisiana, you end up reading about, and all the different variations in this and that. And because of that scenario, or that focus of mine, and seeing discrepancies and all this and that,
Mm.
anytime now when I come across a video that has an inaccuracy that's blatant, I can't control myself. It's completely, I just, I,
No.
because I think to myself two things. Is it, and I see a few things. Is it that they're being dishonest, meaning on purpose for whatever ideology, or on purpose just to make money, or on purpose for whatever number, or because they're lazy, or they, or just let's shoot another video and we'll throw everything in the kitchen sink to it. What is it? Why, they don't know any better. And it really riles me up because I'm like,
Well,
that's complete bullcrap what you're saying, or no, you're missing context, and
yeah,
so I'll get in and I'll write as kindly as I can, but succinct
yeah.
over the missing things, and then offer a suggestion. Oh, maybe check this out, something to that effect. And most of the time, it's all protecting the person's reply is to defend their flag in the ground,
Oh, yeah.
dismissing the extra info. And I've calculated it out in a general lazy way, though.
Mhm.
There's no helping it.
No, you
There's no
can't.
helping it.
You can't unring a bell. That's that total groupthink about an event or an era or a timeline of something that supposedly happened, and you can't unring that bell. You can't. No, it didn't happen that way. No, it never happened. You know,
So
you're trying to fight the tide with a broom. You know.
see, that's the thing. And so there's an area that really is, I guess, touchy. And I ran across the video,
Hmm.
and it's one of these blog or not. Well, yeah, it's kind of like some sort of podcast thing,
Hmm.
kind of like what we're doing, but they're like in the millennial sphere,
Hmm.
and they painted their walls white and black, like they have a theme, and
Hmm.
it's one of these things. And the thing is, they happen to be, or it appears that there's some sort of right wing leaning. Um, and I've ran into a few issues with, there's principles that are underlying in any ideology that one can either like or dislike or whatnot. I won't say which ones I like and dislike
Hmm.
necessarily in terms of that, but like
Okay.
laying the foundation. And but it doesn't follow that if you have a certain philosophy, ideology, whatever you want to call political, whatever it is, be it be it a truism in your eyes or falsehood in your eyes, but they have these principles that the ideology
Sure.
begins with. But it doesn't necessarily follow at all, derived from that, that the concepts that people are propagating are correct. In other
Yeah.
words, you can have a source foundation,
Hmm.
but you can take the road in the wrong direction and end up accepting a ton of assumptions that leads
Right.
you to be in a place of idiocy, as an example. I'm being very broad with it instead of it, but I
And you,
will.
and I get it. You have to be. And but to add to that, I could only say that that's why history and studying history is so important, because you have a track record. I mean, the world is filled with unintended consequences. But having a history to go back and look at and say, hey, we need to watch out for this, we need to watch out for the other, we need to, oh, that was tried 30 years ago and it didn't work then. What makes us think it's going to work now? You know, that's why history is so important. You're supposed to learn from it so you don't repeat the same mistakes over and over.
And there's a lot of pieces to the puzzle of history. It's like just take the United States.
Hmm.
Um, so maybe to one person they have a notion of the history. Like I
Hmm.
have a notion of the history,
Sure.
but I'm aware. I guess let me see if how I can tie this to what I'm trying to the problem that it's kind of something that I've revisited in the past, but Okay, so it is impossible for me to sit here, let's say, and tell you, let's say, I know the history of the United States.
Yeah.
Because the truth is, what whatever I do know of the history of the United States compared to the data, information, all the stuff that exists over
Hmm.
the United States dwarfs what I do know.
Hmm.
Okay, so that realization
Hmm.
should, in my opinion, cause slight, no, actually a lot, but let's say slight pause when overstating certain things, yes or no, one way or the other, because you might be pulling it out of your butt, let's say.
Yeah. It also takes self realization that you don't know everything. And maybe
Right.
you need to just admit that look, I haven't studied that.
Right. Um, so if I'm asked to, and it could be anybody, like nobody's perfect, like, and I'm not
Sure.
trying to suggest this or that. I'm just using me as an because it's the less, um, it puts it on me, and that's the safest
Yeah.
thing for people anywhere listening later or whatnot.
Hmm.
But it would apply to anybody. So if you ask me, okay, Eloy, sitting here, recount the history of Massachusetts.
Yeah.
I will not be able to. I could pluck out
A few things. Yeah.
scatterings, but now let's say, but so let's say I plucked out the scatterings, and so the person heard it and this and that, and said, well, but Eloy, I want to know. I mean, that's what you know. Okay, yeah, that's what you know. But the history is bigger than that, Eloy.
Hmm.
And so, um, in the face of being told that, I could either accept it sooner or later, or not. And the difference being is that when you oh well, I have weakness in this area, and I am inclined to learn it. Okay, you go and learn it. We do have access
Hmm.
to information, so I don't need to know. Like if you ask me, Eloy, what happened at such and such a date in that year in,
Yeah.
I don't know, Washington. I If I don't know it because of this machine that we have here, machine,
Yeah.
I could, and we all can,
You could find it. Yeah.
right? So it's not as big of a stumbling block if you revert us back to 1980 something, where we
Hmm.
would have to
Get up and
like
carry our butt
go
down to the library and gather all the books and go through them. And yeah.
right. So my point is, what there's little excuse at this in this era to misread any number of things. And fine,
Mhm.
we can all misread it, any number of, because it's easily accessible. If we
Mhm.
do confront, if we're confronted with a situation, we can learn the facts around a situation to clear it up. So there's not much of an excuse, and yet, as humans go, even that is not sufficient
No.
for errors to propagate in every which direction category and so on.
Hmm.
It's just part
And
of,
just flat out misinformation, and just flat out omission, either lying by omission to further your agenda or to prove yourself right, or twisting facts around or cherry picking in order to prove a point, you know,
yeah.
because perspective, personality, intent, and agenda also has to come into this, especially when you're talking about a political discussion, you
Yeah,
know.
so I will go to the meat of it. So this show,
Hmm.
um And it could be anything, but I was really intending because it really balled, or it was interesting at least at the very
Hmm.
least to me. Um, they had a panel, all girls and like two guys.
Hmm.
The guys were the show hosts or whatnot. Very pretty
Hmm.
ladies and whatnot. One of them was in a bra for some reason. It's like everything is like if this were in the 1800s, this was early 1900s, they'd be all nice and stuff, and it would be a play.
Hmm.
But over here, they're all like it's all there's like this corruption of just anyways. Um, we can't look for intelligent conversation in that particular podcast. But what struck me is that it was a clip, and they were talking about, this is going to sound stupid kid stuff, but there is a point to it. And they were talking about dating people
Hmm.
outside their race.
Hmm.
And this young girl said, "Well, not I, I'm paraphrasing. I particularly don't like to date white guys," she said,
Hmm.
"because they don't understand this, whatever she said."
Hmm.
And they all said, "But you're white."
Hmm.
And she said, "No, I'm not. I'm Latina." And they all froze. And they said, "We all think of you as white, so you're white." And she was like, now, but she explained herself. She said, "Well, listen, um, my culture is Mexican.
Hmm.
My race may be white," and she was, oh, what we would,
Very light skinned.
yeah,
Yeah.
and but I don't even think in those terms and stuff. My culture is Mexican,
Hmm.
and they fought her tooth and nail on it, and it was back and forth. And I was observing this. I was completely, well, I was thinking to myself a lot of things, but I thought to myself, well, this is a confusion that everybody has that spills outside of this little podcast. Well, actually, it's a very popular podcast. I don't even know the name of it, but the room is all white with black, and they always have girls there, and it's kind
I
of
don't
a
know.
stupid. It's a stupid, but the point was that it was the confusion of categories
Hmm.
and the way people solved these inconsistencies from one person to the other was based on how she appeared,
Hmm.
which is the go-to across time apparently. But she wasn't having it. She was saying, well, no, this and that. And um and they were brutal on her in the comments. And I was reading through the comments, and
That's.
well, go ahead. If
I
you
was just going to say that is just flat out uncalled for. That's to me. It's just, I don't know. Keep going. I want to hear. I want to hear where it went.
So depending on the person's point of view, and
Hmm.
this is always the case, isn't it? It
Sure.
depends on people's points of view, but and it's a touchy thing. That's why I said it's a touchy thing, because because it it touches people's sensibilities on what they self-identify, or their growing
Hmm.
up, their family life, their all these variations.
Yeah.
um like, don't call, you know
Yeah.
an Irish person English.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, don't call a Peruvian something else. Don't call a Dominican this and that, uh, or Puerto Rican. It's like it's all these things because you have all these.
Sure.
It's too confusing for folks.
Hmm.
But in the comments, the Mexican people that I'm assuming because of what they wrote were claiming her for them, um, like in the positive to her, and pushing her away from the white category and saying, no, she's Mexican, she's not white, which is a fallacy because those are two different categories.
Yeah, how can people be so right and so wrong at the same time inside of one sentence?
The whole thing was so, and when I read through that, and so I did leave a comment,
Hmm.
but my comment was a little bit too nuanced, and it brought in DNA and this, and that, and I kind of figure that that's not going to help anybody.
No.
I mean, it would help a person that is open minded and looking to understand, but it would not help people that are already set in their ways and have lack of, they don't even consider the possibility of reevaluating their understanding of things. And the DNA thing is another layer of complexity that,
Hmm.
and
Don't
so it's too,
confuse me with the facts. My mind is made up.
right, and it's human to do. I'm not suggesting, like, it is what it is, and
Hmm.
people, they know what they know.
Hmm.
To question what you know, to have better clarity, and so that's why the confusion comes around. Everybody gets to decide what things under these categories mean.
Hmm.
So when it comes to culture and race, or ethnicity and race, it's it depends what people understand that to be. And so when it comes to something like Mexican, um, it's interchangeable with race for a lot of people.
Hmm.
It's not true
Yeah.
in the most basic way, but there's a sense that it's true. Um, there's a sense that it's true,
And
and
that's one of those things that I was talking about when I say that it's it's misinformation, not necessarily with evil intent. It's just a lack of understanding. You
yeah,
know, you and I both know American is not a race. Mexican is not a race. Puerto Rican is not a race. Those are nationalities. Those are cultures, but they're not separate and distinct races.
right,
We understand that and we know that because you've studied it and you've educated me more on DNA than I care to think about, simply because I'm ignorant to it. I haven't studied it. Whereas that's your specialties, your special focus right now.
yeah. My
You
my
know.
interest is that as
Hmm.
a consequence of just doing the genealogy.
Right.
I
So,
didn't know. Well, go ahead. Go ahead.
but in saying that, well, no, you're Mexican, your race is Mexican, that propagates that myth, and it gets to the point to where you're not going to convince people otherwise.
No, no, because there's too many layers. There's too many layers to that
Hmm.
that are nuanced, that cascade to build the concept of Mexican
Hmm.
to be a certain thing. But and that's too complicated for people even to freaking bother with.
Right.
Um,
There you go. If they have no interest in that study, they're not even going to consider it.
yeah, but even the Mexicans run the same fallacy.
Yeah.
Like, the paradigm is the following.
Hmm.
This is my understanding. I don't expect other people to want to understand it. Some, yes, but the majority, no. This is the paradigm. We live, all of us, whether we like it or not, because we all live in this world, and particular in this country, but it spills over
Hmm.
because of this country's influence. We live in a, let's say, 1700s understanding to a great degree
Hmm.
of race to this day.
Yeah.
Most people to this day exist under the category of race in a 1700s era
Hmm.
understanding because it's
Well,
one of those features that just, even though it just passed down
hmm,
un and
unchecked.
not everybody may have the same notion, but that notion at the beginning enshrined in certain laws and then removed, and all this and that,
Hmm.
but that notion undergirds across the eras
Hmm.
and people today. And so that's one of the things that, well, watching that little interchange with that young girl, she
Hmm.
was right in a sense. Actually, she was confused. She was right in her sentiment. She said, "Well, look, I'm Mexican. I'm not." She figured white to
Hmm.
be a northwestern European, which
Me.
I've mentioned to you. Right, this northwestern Europe, but this northwestern European, and even north. The problem is so complicated. That's a type of
Yeah.
European. That's not European.
Right.
That's a type of Europe.
Right.
But
It's a subset. Yeah.
it's a subset. But it propagated greatly in
Hmm.
in the Americas. But people don't process that because it's been handed through
Hmm.
and accepted as the paradigm. And so because
Absolutely. You are not of my tribe, therefore you are X, Y, or Z.
right, and so now with the DNA, there's this whole thing, and I've realized it, but there's no fixing that. But the fallacy confuses
Well,
people, and people are
it
perpetually confused. I
well the
was, I was when started looking at it, I was like, what?
well the
How's
fa-
this work?
the fallacy has to stop being taught. It has to stop being propagated, and real information needs to be taught. You know, and it sounds to me like they spent a heck of a lot more time on that subject than I would have ever given it. Because, simply put, I think there are certain things that are just nobody's business. And you're talking about dating outside your race. I figure it this way: I'm attracted to who I'm attracted to, and I'll answer to nobody about that. It's none of your damn business. And it's the same thing with that girl. She's attracted to who she's attracted to. She shouldn't have to answer to anybody about that, and it's nobody else's business but hers.
You should have seen their faces when she
World's
said,
shortest discussion.
you should have seen their faces though.
Hmm.
Um, when she said, well, I'm not white. And they all stopped. It looked like some sort of scene out of the Twilight Zone.
Hmm.
They were all, because the thing is
Deer in the headlights.
they didn't consider, although to be, that show, that little episode accentuated the confusion on what's what
Hmm.
and how things work, um from millennials point of view. And because they're millennials, right,
Hmm.
and we're not millennials, we're generations back. I'm Generation X and you're hugging two
Yeah,
generations.
I'm one of them weird ones. I'm depending upon who you talk to. I'm either baby boomer or I'm Gen X. It you know.
So we have a little bit more mileage. I mean,
Mhm.
you know, uh, they say an old dog can't learn new tricks, and that might
Watch
be
me.
what.
Watch me.
Well, that might, well, to be fair, that might be true for a whole host of, like, I don't know about you, I'm not figuring on learning parachuting anytime soon, but there are other things that I may learn some new
Oh
tricks.
yeah,
So there is
sure,
uh, uh, some stuff that's out of reach because of
sure.
certain, um these new kids on the block, um without them knowing, I don't know if they've considered it. Obviously not, because they were quite confused, and I would have been too. They're as good as me or anybody else, because it just depends on the
Sure.
information that you eventually stumble upon and get some clarity over. So it's not like, oh, one person. It's just, it is what it is. It's a thing of, oh, I ended up reading about this, and now I'm
Hmm.
invested, and so now I know something that I didn't know before. So it's available to all humans, but these are kids that aren't aware. I just found it fascinating in that level that they've been handed down understanding generationally going back in time. And when you think about these kids today that complain about, I guess, how the older generations did it wrong
Yeah.
and they're reinventing the wheel,
Yeah.
this is an example of, they don't even, they're not even self-aware
Hmm.
of how much the older generations influence their even their way of thinking.
Yeah.
Even though this is
Um,
one example, but in other words, there is no such thing as reinventing the wheel when it comes
well,
to all the things that we, well, go ahead.
especially if you've never looked at that wheel really close to see what they already had for you to try to improve on. You know, it, it, I guess my entire problem with that whole premise is the automatic dismissal of anything that's happened beforehand. Every generation blames the previous generation for the problems in the world. All right. And that's been going on forever, as far back as you want to go. I believe I want to say it was Aristotle. It may not have been, but for some reason I want to think it was I want to think it was Aristotle in one of his written pieces was talking about the same thing. This new generation coming up is running around backwards. They don't know what they're doing. They don't know what they're talking about. And I shudder to think of the world that they're going to create after we're gone, you know. So this is not a new discussion. But what I do have a problem with is someone who is 25, 26, 27 years old, who is sure that he's got this whole thing figured out. He's going to school me. And it's like, are you kidding me? You still got dirt behind your ears from your last uh, little league game. I got socks older than you, and you're going to tell me how life works? Go ahead. Tell me, double hipness.
Yeah, it's a tough one. The problem is a big one, and I don't know if it's just the natural course of things, but if if I return 20 years in the past
Mm-hmm.
compared to now,
Mm-hmm.
the amount of information that I've gathered since then, and experience, life experience,
Sure.
and realizing interactions and what went wrong, what didn't, how I should have better handled the situation, like all the variables.
Sure.
Um, I'm more paused, although I can, you know, catch I can get pissed or whatnot,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe fly off the cuff. It's rarer because of all the knowledge that I've acquired. But 20 years back, I would have been a little bit less. And the thing is, if you asked my 20 years back self,
Mm-hmm.
over one thing or another, my only reference point was what I had acquired up to that point anyhow.
Yeah.
And in order to make the leap, it
Mm-hmm.
required the 20 years for me.
Well,
In other words,
not only the knowledge, but the experience that comes along with that 20 years.
yeah, so um we don't know what we've mentioned it before, but we don't know what we don't know, and that's another situation, another paradox, because even though the information is there, so like, look, I guess I'll end this whole bit, or unless we can go anywhere else, but I the the thing is this. It is true that you, everyone out here, myself, have the same access, roughly, unless your speed internet is slightly, but that's only a matter of
Sure.
um, we have the same access to all available data on the internet that's for free,
Hmm.
and even then, the stuff you have to pay for if you were so inclined. But we have the same universe to explore and grab data from.
Sure.
Well, that is a fact, I believe, is fair to say.
Hmm.
And yet, um, you you will have people stumbling endlessly over the same fallacies. And even if confronted with the data, even if directed to the fountain of clarity, they will still persist regardless of the door open to them,
Hmm.
or at least the finger pointing towards the door over any issue, problem, and this and that. And the problem is that if you tell some, in some instances, if you tell someone, listen, dude, you're incorrect over this, and
Here's why.
here's why, um, take a look at this and that. If you, to that person, unless the person self actualizes and makes a conscious decision to want to correct an error, or to make sure that an error is not being corrected on his or her part, unless it comes from the person saying, now it is time for me to clarify. If that does, and it could be anything, it could be how to
Hmm.
use a thumb, a thimble,
Yeah.
whatever.
Thimble.
um it could be anything until that decisive moment, even with the information in people's right in front of them. And that's why you have endless. And so, okay, I find that little detail,
Hmm.
um which, by the way, we're all stuck in, because I don't know right here,
Well,
but I don't know. So I
well,
am
it's
just this
it
side of
goes
that
it goes
fence.
beyond that. It goes beyond that, though. It's more than just you don't know what you don't know. There's a lot of things that you know that you have no reason to question. A certain percentage of those are going to be wrong.
Well,
A
yeah,
certain percentage of that is going to be right. So if you've been told something all your life and it's been reinforced,
yeah.
not just by your parents, but by your schooling, by your church, by your friends and their families, all of that stuff, if that's been reinforced, you have no reason to question it. Why would you question it? Even if that fact happens to be false.
Right.
So there's really it's beyond you don't know what you don't know. It's just that you have no reason to question it.
Yeah, well, there's the paradigm that we exist in, and I'll give you a benign,
Hmm.
well, it's not benign, it's actually catastrophic, but it's benign in terms of shocking to people in one way or
Hmm.
the other. Deeply,
Hmm.
it's benign. Um, for years, studying the Louisiana thing, or actually the Canary Island thing, I couldn't advance other than the paperwork that I had,
Hmm.
because every time I ran across paperwork, it had surnames that interchanged and switched and convoluted and such,
Hmm.
and I couldn't accept. No, scratch that. I was this side of the fence of understanding what was going on,
Hmm.
and then one day, not too long ago, maybe a couple of years ago, I sat down and said, I'm gonna sit with this, and I realized that names, surnames, could either be handed back then. It's not like today,
Hmm.
either in the British or English speaking world or Spanish world for that matter,
Hmm.
as it is today, where it's a stable, roughly thing.
Yeah.
Not back then. Back then, a girl is born, a daughter is born, and perhaps the mother, in remembrance of her grandmother, agreed with the husband. Dawn is given the grandmother's surname,
Hmm.
and that grandmother's surname was given to her because maybe it wasn't her father's surname, it was her mother's. And then the inverse is true.
Yeah.
And so what you end up having going back in time is this m- messy to us, but clear and understanding and clear and purposeful to them at the time, but messy to us. And so it creates, and so in order for me to advance, I had to break with the notion that surnames, even though I
Were
had
written
read
in
it,
stone. Yeah.
I had read that they weren't always written in stone, but I discarded it. I
Hmm.
said, "Yeah, that's fine. That exists. I understand that exists. It's being said, but I'm not going to fly under that premise." And so I had to cross reference. And so, anyways, the point is that paradigms.
Yeah.
Sometimes we're this side of a clearer understanding,
Hmm.
but we don't have the wherewithal due to, I don't know, bias or
Well,
any
just
number
lack
of
of
things.
information, or it didn't fit. I
Yeah,
know exactly what you're talking about when it comes to genealogy. I mean, you can, because, and that goes beyond spelling. That goes into, in the great grand scheme of things, surnames are a fairly recent thing in the timeline of humanity, you know,
I
and
mean,
standardization of those surnames is even newer, because it is,
yeah,
as you said, in certain cultures. I mean, they could, and it's fine in that everybody around that little girl knew that she had her great grandmother's name.
right.
Everybody within the family unit knew that. Well, it's 3, 4, 500 years later. Who knew that?
Right, and it's a big problem
Yeah.
because for us, like for us looking back,
Hmm.
well, another example is situations where they didn't have, they weren't Christian, they
Hmm.
were indigenous people.
Yeah.
Well,
With no written history.
with no written history. Well, now comes along European people
Hmm.
and they marry with them, and they, from this point on, you are Hernandez as an example.
Hmm.
And and so it was, and from that point on, Hernandez, and and that flipped and switched around
Hmm.
as generations went down. So
Yeah.
which is the case, so I have lines, or if they were Jewish, I
Hmm.
have both examples. I have examples of Jewish people that would have had Jewish names, but we're
Hmm.
talking about now, mind you, just to be clear, and not that it matters either way, but as
Several
far as
hundred
I,
years back. Yeah.
we're talking about like 400 and something years ago,
Yeah.
I had various Jewish ancestors. It's part of the Spanish, of the history of the Iberian exploration
Yeah.
of the world.
Yeah.
Um, so I
Well.
basically connect with people that would not, and would have switched names, given names in some of the branches. Other
Hmm.
branches, they were just peninsula Spanish people that were basically old Christians and so on. But it's like they all funneled,
Yeah.
and so yeah, so it's with all that
Well, I
understanding. It's
I
like,
have the surname change in my ancestry. 1,000 years ago, it was De Ghent. Then it became De Lindsay. Then it was just became Lindsay. So three surname changes in 1,000 years. If I didn't know, I didn't know.
well, yeah,
Well, now through genetics, we know. So
it's pretty wild at the end of the day that we are where we're at, I mean, we're talking about this genetics thing, and I did open it up with that
Mhm,
podcast, but I
mhm,
found it an interesting thing because it highlighted the complication of this
mhm,
Hispanic Latino,
mhm.
um, you know,
Yeah,
in that sort of parking lot or waiting station of understanding.
yeah.
Where is it one thing? Is it the other? And this and that. Like for myself,
Mhm,
if so, in theory, or not in theory, like let's say, well, it's in theory, or in practice, 1 foot and 1 foot. I could literally call myself Hispanic and Latino merge into one because, well, I'm thinking of Latino in terms of Latin, in terms of Italy,
mhm,
um, because I have Italian. But if and Hispanic is Hispanic. But if you think of Latino as a thing in South America and this and that, that's an American thing
mhm,
that propagated in America, but it's actually a French creation. Napoleon wanted to distance the concept of Spain from South America and bring it more into the Romance
mhm.
grouping, which includes France. So they did that with that intention,
Oh, wow.
and it caught on, but it didn't catch on. If you ask an Ecuadorian if they're Latino, they'll look at you like what? If you, a lot of unless they're Americanized people, then
Mhm.
they'll understand what that is. To them, they're just Ecuadorian.
Yeah.
Like they don't the concepts of race as well is a confusing thing for Spanish people because they've been mixing
Well,
for a long time.
and that's why I don't understand. I mean, this is 2023. I don't understand why we're even still having this discussion,
Oh,
as a
it's the history.
society, as a culture, as a society,
Well, because people
because
don't know.
well, understood. No, why the topic of race is still such a huge topic is what I'm getting at. Because in most other cultures, it's just not. It's just not really a topic of discussion.
In Europe,
People are different. We know that. Okay, we move on with life. For some reason, we seem to be hung up on that.
yeah, but we have a unique. You could argue that things such as slavery
Hmm.
were around way before we even existed
Yeah,
in the United States.
yeah, I get that. I understand and I know that, but I also know that that's in the past, and there's nothing that we can do to change that other than make sure nothing like that ever happens again.
Yeah,
We can reconcile, is what I'm getting at.
but my point of bringing that up is
Hmm.
before the United States,
Hmm.
one could argue that there's examples across the world
Oh, sure,
of enslavement of people
sure.
that
Yeah,
over
that goes back millennia.
yeah, and it was whoever the losers were in any
Hmm.
given situation,
Yeah,
or the people captured, or for any
yeah.
variety of different
The
circumstances.
stronger enslave the weaker.
Yeah,
The
and
fact
it was
the word slave itself comes from the word Slav.
mhm.
Western Europeans took Eastern Europeans as slaves.
Well, actually, as far as I understand it, and I could be correct, it was actually to do with what the Persians, Arabs, and North Africans,
Oh yeah, it
and
was all a convoluted thing. It was all
yeah, it
convoluted.
was more to do. It wasn't Western Europeans taking over Eastern Europeans. It was
Uh,
more to do with Mediterranean people capturing the Slavs. Um,
yeah,
yeah,
yes, but well, anyway, it's a whole long convoluted history. My point being is it's been happening for millennia. It wasn't invented in 1776. That's my
right,
whole
right,
point.
right.
It,
Well,
and we can't undo what has been done in the past, no matter what you're talking about. All we can do is acknowledge it and swear to never let anything like that happen again and reconcile.
yeah, but I'm bringing it up because that's a long time.
Hmm.
Other examples are a long time ago.
Hmm. Sure.
further away so much where
Mhm.
anybody can really um it's a hard sell for us for a Ukrainian today, as an
Mhm.
example, to be deeply in a very deep. It is possible. Anything's possible, but it's almost like if someone from Ukraine or any number of the were to say, you know what, I'm still that still irks because what happened down in the Mediterranean, and or, as an example, because it's just too distant of thing. In the United States, because of and we're all participants, so it's
Mhm.
not because we're part of the society. So it's
Mhm.
not like we're it's our paradigm. Um, but in the United States, it's a recent and recent is relative, but in comparison to I don't know back 1,000 years, it's there's a big difference. You still have grandkids and people alive that
Yeah.
that went through like discriminatory things,
Yes.
and so there 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 is a more recent scenario where people
Mhm.
still
Well,
recall for obvious reasons.
okay. Well, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying forget it. I'm not saying get over it. I'm not saying anything of that nature. In fact, I'm saying just the opposite. It has to be acknowledged. It has to be taught. It's a horrific time in our history. It that has to be remembered because the only way we can ensure that it doesn't happen again is by remembering it. We have to teach it. What I'm saying is we also have to teach reconciliation, that we can get along together, that we can operate in this world together.
Yeah, and we do it all the time.
Yeah. And again, there's the tribal thing. People congregate with people that they can identify with and that they want to be around. That's why we have cultural places all over this country. I mean, you're talking about the communities in Louisiana. We have Asian communities out here out west with big populations because they understand one another, they know the culture, they're comfortable being with these people. They don't want to be out in the woods with me. I'm comfortable here in this West Coast, more laid back environment. I don't like going to Los Angeles. I don't like going to Atlanta or any of the big cities down south or back east, Boston. I don't like that. That's not a part of my culture. Get me back out here in the woods where I can breathe and I'm a happy guy. So, but that doesn't mean that because the guy that lives next door to me doesn't look like me, we're enemies. Far from it. Get to know the guy, he may be your best friend in the damn world. You know,
Yeah,
we do have to acknowledge what has happened in the past, but we also at the same time have to recognize that it was the past.
yeah, and but another like I guess attaching it to um those millennials in that podcast.
I got more to say to
Una,
that.
what's that?
I said I got more to say about that too, but go ahead.
Um, unaware, those millennials in that podcast, unaware, maybe it appeared so,
Hmm.
that they are working under the premise that was handed down to them. Like, in other words, what we said, um, this is this and that's that. Why would I question it? It's just part of the reality that we live. Without questioning things, and we take things as given.
Hmm.
Um, in many cases, it's in many cases it's just fine because whatever. But in some cases, not evaluating or reevaluating or take especially if you're told. Like the girl explained her little nuance, and
Hmm.
even though she didn't perhaps express it perfectly eloquent, she was conjuring up a inconsistency between, hey, I'm Mexican, you're saying I'm white, um but that's, oh, and she said, but that's not how growing up people saw me. They knew my last name, and
Hmm.
they considered, and so she had a nuance in there. It wasn't perfect, who is, but they granted her a racial status, and she did admit, okay, yes, I am white, but basically she was saying that her Mexican ethnicity
Hmm.
was more primary than
Hmm.
race, whereas these kids, American kids, their primary is race, and then whatever follows, and that is a little bit of a, and
Yeah.
I can say that that is, I grew up equally. I don't, we didn't, I wasn't taught, I mean, it's obvious, like you grew up in this, we grew up in the same country, so
Hmm.
we know all the nuances, but as a lesson growing up, it didn't, race wasn't primary. It was basically, oh, you're Cuban, oh, this guy's Colombian, oh, this guy's this and that.
Well, it was different cultures because there is a
Right.
difference when you're
Yeah.
talking about something culturally. And I've told you many times about my friend growing up. That we're a Mexican family. He was my best friend at the time, and I totally dug it. His mother loved me to death because in fact, she told me she loved it when I went to church with them because those that was the only time her kids wouldn't give her problems about going to church because they wanted me to go. They wanted me to visit, go with them. It was special when I went to church with them, and they were happy to go. But I immersed myself in that culture through my friend, and I learned so much from him. And it was it that kind of thing is, I hesitate to call it fun, but it's fun. It's interesting to me.
Oh yeah, you learn
Yeah,
different
absolutely.
varieties.
I learned that there were so many words in Spanish for things that we don't have in English, and I thought that was just cool. I learned that there were different ways of doing any number of things that I would have never have considered, and it's all because I was new to that culture. So, yeah, it was an adventure for me and I had an absolute ball. But it that kind of thing has always been fascinating to me. So, a cultural reference is one thing. An age reference is another thing. But anymore, especially with the advent of DNA technology, and as it progresses and as it grows and as it gets better and better and more samples are taken and the catalog of information expands, I mean, it's expanding exponentially every day. um, I think we're just now starting to come to grips with the fact that there aren't all that many differences in the races, and what we would once consider to be separate races just aren't. They just aren't. They're not separate. They are the same race.
Yeah,
And
well,
in
yeah,
different
that's
cultures.
that's where the nuance. The problem is that
Mhm,
that the understanding of
mhm,
why that is
mhm.
compared to what we grew up understanding
Right.
is so different
Mhm,
that, and by the way, we couldn't even have this conversation if if you and I tried to have this conversation 5 years ago
mhm.
with all the missing information that we have been able to
Yeah.
add to the roster.
Mhm,
We couldn't intelligibly, like, the assumptions that we would be making in order to get from one spot to the next part of the conversation would be
And
we wouldn't be able to, because we wouldn't have enough puzzle pieces to be
yeah,
able to say, oh well, this is true, this is
well,
not true. We just couldn't do it.
we would have to go under the knowledge that was available at the time and our interpretation of that knowledge, what we understood of that knowledge, because neither of us are doctors, neither of us are geneticists. So
Yeah,
even today, right now, we're still only operating on that we've learned, which is like the tip of the iceberg.
yeah.
Because
The
people who do this for a living, people who have studied this forever, are still discovering new things every day. We're
Yeah,
really in the infancy of this.
it's exponentially. I mean, there's whole groups of people dedicated to just searching for bones.
Yeah.
But unlike in the past, they now drill into the bones, take the powdery stuff,
Hmm.
and extract DNA from it in order to figure out. And so there's all sorts of stuff that,
And 20 years ago, that was science fiction.
right. So they're so literally they're mapping
Hmm.
things that we would not have been able to even consider
Hmm.
as a possibility. So it's all new stuff. But again, we're living our paradigm.
Well,
Again, if you asked us to sit down and have a conversation over this
hmm,
a few years ago, even though the information was already out, but
hmm,
since I had not opened that door, you had not probably opened that door. I
hmm,
can't speak for you, but like, let's say we wouldn't have the pieces, even though the information was there. It was only until, for one reason or the other, we ended up
hmm.
in that thing. But um what you said, so as far as it ends up that we're all it ends up that all human beings, even like let's say someone in the jungles of the Amazon,
Hmm.
um uh and it could be someone out in Australia that's original
Hmm.
indigenous to Australia, or someone in the heart of Africa, or someone, up
Yeah.
in wherever. It ends up that the stretches of DNA, we all share stretches of that
Sure.
DNA, like a but um the confusion is great because it's very
Well,
nuanced. Well, let me just say this: the the when the longer stretches of DNA, combination of letters that stretch on,
hmm,
um, the closer related you are in time to to whatever group that you belong to. So, um, and so there's a shifting of that, and so you can trace. Oh, this group is here, that group is there. In a general sense, it
right.
gives you a plotting of where these. But if they retract the DNA back in time, all of those different groups merge into one
Right.
small ball. And
Hmm.
so that's how, in a roundabout way, that's one way that they say, well, we all have the same formula, just in different combinations. But as you go back, those stretches can be
Yeah.
puzzled together, and it forms a small group that came out of
Right.
Africa,
Right.
you know?
Absolutely.
But you can't say that to, like, let's say,
Well, but you can
and that
have
wouldn't
that,
mean
but you
that,
can have that knowledge
yeah,
and you can put that knowledge out there. We live in a time where if new news comes out today, it's easier to spread that news than it's ever been. But we're also living in a time where there is so much, it's harder than hell to keep up with it all. So there's a lot of information comes out every day about every subject. You have to basically be tuned in on that subject to get the new news that happened today. And if your interest is in genetics, that's what you're going to be focused on. You don't give a damn about nanotechnology or machining. or fish species in Uganda, you're focused on human genetics and the human genome because that's your specialty, that's your area of study. So for the public at large to get this information takes even longer because it has to filter through and it has to get out to the masses. It's got to be deemed more important than that breakthrough in machining titanium. It's got to be seen as a higher priority than a new polymer that'll make tires last 100 years. You know, it it's just, I don't know, it's easier to put information out. It's just harder for people to get.
Yeah,
Then they have to believe it.
there's endless amounts of papers, science papers on any given number of different like things that they've worked out and they put it out there. Um, that probably don't get a handful of people reading, if at all.
Yeah.
And the information is out there, and stuff. And so there's that as well.
Hmm.
But my only issue is that thing that I've mentioned before, which is we have ignorance, the category of ignorance, and no one escapes that.
Right.
No human on this planet can escape it because we do not know everything there is to know. And
Hmm.
as a default,
Right.
that means that we're ignorant over more things than we could
Yeah.
possibly even imagine.
Right.
There's that category of ignorance. My problem with all this, or I guess my pet peeve, um, is perpetual, what I call perpetual ignorance, which I
Yeah.
define as you have a incorrect concept, you're confronted with a conflict of your notion, and you double it down, and you try
One,
to raise that your flag on that concept of yours,
one word.
e- even in the face of of well, go ahead, Tommy.
One word. Ego. I have to be right.
Yes, it's ego, but it's also the paradigm. So when it comes to things like this, like what
Hmm.
we're talking about, but it could be
Yeah.
anything. um Ego is probably the best way to say it. They're doubling it down and say no because I'm
Hmm.
right, I'm right, I'm right.
Hmm.
um and so i have a I have a problem with that, in that if you're going to double down in the face of X, Y, and Z information, then lay it on the table and let's see what's what. Let's see if it's so, by actually being true to the so ignorance, it's understandable.
Sure.
But perpetual ignorance, doubling down as you go, that's to me the worst.
Yeah.
Um so that's the one that I don't like,
Yeah. Yeah. And
because you're aware that you're being confronted with
mhm.
with
And the first thing you do is get defensive. And
or
that's how you spot the agenda is they run out of substance inside of one sentence and then resort to getting personal.
yeah. And I will say this too, this is a side thing, but or no, it's not a side thing, it actually hits to the so another reason why. And you were saying, well, we should probably move forward from this, not forget,
Hmm.
because
We can move forward. Yes.
the bad things and that should be remembered. However, we should, go for, okay, so this particular topic is very relevant, I think, in terms of its usefulness for political ideological.
That's 100%.
Right. But here's the caveat to that. I believe, and it doesn't have to be all malicious. It could, and even mostly malicious. It just is what it is because it's the reality and paradigm in which one unfolds in this life. But politically speaking, it's used advantageously on both
Hmm.
extremes
Oh, yeah.
with different for different purposes. On the one side, it's used to, in my opinion, initiate or propagate um, discontent, um, and other things. It
Hmm.
perpetuates a us versus them type feel, um, under a false assumption. Um, and on the other side, it delineates an us and them, strengthening a concept that is erroneous
Hmm.
but advantageous because it gives placement as opposed to other people. Those two things are effective because you get to coalesce around certain ideas using race on both
Hmm.
sides. So it's not just the one side.
No, it's not. And you know my attitude on that. I've told you about this, oh God, countless times. When we've had this discussion behind the scenes. It's 100% for power. It's 100%. See, this right here that you and I are doing is the most dangerous thing in the world to the powers that be. We are having a civil discussion about a very touchy subject that could go south real easily. But it's not. We're having a discussion and we don't agree lockstep with one another. We agree on more than we disagree with. And I think if people sat down and had a civil discussion, most folks agree more often than they disagree. But the powers that be can't have that because the minute you and I agree, they lose a little bit more power. They lose a little bit because we don't need them. They have to keep the various groups around the country fighting with one another. If it's not about race, it's about sexuality. If it's not about sexuality, it's about economic status. If it's not about economic status, it's about religion or spirituality in some way or shape or form. We're coming up on an election year. You watch, one of those things is going to be the main hot topic.
Or various.
Happens all the time. It also happens to work. The more they can keep us fighting with one another, the more occupied we are with either attacking or defending, and the less time we pay attention to them. They keep the power. So they don't want civil discourse like this. They don't want civil discussions because what we're doing is we're winnowing away at their power because we don't need them. That's
Yeah.
more or less what I mean when I say nobody in a position of authority has ever determined my happiness. They've never determined how I live my life. You know, they can do whatever they want to do and they're going to answer to the maker one of these days. I'm just trying to get through life being the best person I know how to be. One encounter at a time. That's all there is to it. That's all I can do.
Yeah, it's and this thing is just one
Mhm.
leg of a multi legged
Yeah,
creature
sure
of
enough.
of a tool used to create a mess so that the machine can function the
Hmm.
way it wishes to
Hmm.
function. It's just one of many things, but I, I I thought it was so. To go back, these are observations.
Hmm.
um and you and the folks out there and I are just a, a handful in an ocean of millions upon millions of people
Yeah.
that would have, regardless of information or data
Hmm.
or ethics or any number of things, will go about the business that they're going to go about doing. And in that ocean, um that's why I said it's only, it can't be helped, but one sees little blips
Yeah.
of things because of the thing, because of the study that one is into. And
Sure.
and so you pointed out, as, look at this, I think that this is, I just found it a curious moment that spoke to people not realizing that they are the inheritors of not just that, like the notion of race, not just that, but these new up and comers are the inheritors of everything, good and bad.
Right.
But many times they don't realize, and they think that they reinvented the wheel.
Well, in a many ways they can. Now, I said I wanted to get back to that podcast for a second. Jim Dockrell makes a point here. He said, "I used to tell my son, I'm not smarter than you. I just have 23 years more experience." That's more profound than you, I think, Jim. Maybe you do know how profound it is, but that's 100% correct. But to be intellectually honest and to be fair, yes, I did say having some 25, 26, 27-year old try to tell me, oh, you've got life all figured out. You're going to school me. All right, go ahead, chief. Knock yourself out. I will not play pin the tail on the millennial and say they don't know squat, because they're experiencing things now that I never had to experience and that I never went through. I don't know what the dating scene is like now for a 19-year-old guy. I don't know what it's about. I've been out of that market for so long, it's not even funny. So I can't sit there and school him on how to do it. No, this is how you impress a girl. I don't know what impresses girls now. You know, I'm an old man.
So you could, in theory, instead of saying, "Oh, I'm smarter than you," you can ask the person, whoever you're talking to, and if they're younger, and say, "Oh, I'm 5 years younger." You can say, "Listen, I'm only 5 years smarter than you, so just don't worry about it."
Yeah,
Or, "I'm only 10 years."
I just a little bit more experience. That's all. But I'm also a lot more cynical. So, I can't tell you I can't tell you how to get a girl to go out on a date with you. I can only help you build up enough confidence to go up and talk to her. That's all I can do. The rest of it is on you. She ain't dating me, she's dating you. All I can do is try to tell you, well,
Potentially.
you know, be yourself. If you say something dumb, it happens. Learn from it and move on. Don't worry about it. One of two things is going to happen. She's going to say yes, she's going to say no. It's going to be one of those two things. But you need a little bit more confidence in yourself so that she can see this guy's a loon. Hell, no way I'm dating this guy. Or, yeah, you sound like somebody I'd like to get to know a little bit better. That's
Come
all I
over
can
here,
do.
Poppy.
But I have absolutely no idea what it's like to date in 2023. So
Yeah.
for me to try to present myself as some sort of an expert in that field, that's even worse than a 25-year-old telling me, trying to tell me how the world works. you know?
Yeah, that is a good point.
So they're facing things now that you and I never faced,
Yeah, they have a
you know?
different set of
Sure.
circumstances that may overlap in many ways
Hmm.
to our growing up circumstances, but
Hmm.
in a whole lot of other ways,
Well,
it's not even similar.
well, think back to when you were 15, 16, 17 years old. Where did you go to meet girls?
They
I'll
were all
bet
around
you
all the time.
I'll bet well, it was either school, the mall, maybe you had a certain arcade you hung
Here
out
on the
at.
block.
Yeah, or just in the neighborhood. Well, everybody's indoors on their phone now. Most folks meet online. I would be screwed trying to talk to somebody online and convince them to meet me for dinner. That's just not a part of I want to it's kind of like trying to buy produce online. No, I want to see the produce. I want to make sure that I'm getting the bag of potatoes that's whole and not three rotten ones in the bottom left corner.
Right.
I'm not saying I want to get hands on the merchandise, but I want to see that merchandise.
Hi, I'm Teresa.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it could. That's one aspect of it. Another aspect of it is I'm 5'7". She needs to know that.
Hi, I'm famished. My name is Margaret.
Yeah, I mean, my voice may just absolutely sound like fingernails on chalkboard
I
to her.
can't I can't just have a salad this evening. So
You know,
bust out the half slab.
yeah. I mean, there's so many things that we just don't have to consider. But by the same token, there's a lot of things that they didn't have to consider. You know, that they don't have to consider that we did. So I'm not going to say these people are running around with their heads on backwards and don't know what they're doing. They have to operate under a different set of rules than we did, and they're just trying to get by. But there are still some commonalities there. So
Yeah,
you know,
there's still some commonalities in
and as far as asking people
plenty.
about dating outside of their races, I think it's nobody's business. Nobody can tell you. You know what you're attracted to. Nobody can tell you that's wrong. And you don't have to answer to anybody as far as who you're attracted to and who you're not, who you want to date and who you don't want to date. That's nobody's business but your own. And
So
everybody
the
else can just go whistle.
so the United States Census, um, under the categories that they designate for race, in the last one, I forget when it was. It was 20 or
2020.
2020. It shows 78% white
Mm-hmm.
for the country, or
Yeah.
something to that. 70 something. I think it's 78. Could be 76 point something. I think it's 78. And for the category of, and that's white alone, right? And
Mm-hmm.
for the category of white non-Hispanic, it's like 58.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning, in order to arrive at the 78, I think it's 78. It could be 70
Mm-hmm.
something point. I think it's 78 point something. They include the white Hispanics into the white category.
Mm-hmm.
But, well, they also have the separate category of ethnicity, which actually refers to whether or not one is Hispanic or not. Um, but the white category includes people of North Africa,
Mm-hmm.
the Middle East, and
Mm-hmm.
there's some other parts there that I forget what it was.
Mm-hmm.
So the traditional notion within a spectrum for the category of white, at least in the man on the street notion
Mm-hmm.
of what that is, would be a Northwestern European concept, primarily with residuals that
Well,
spill over, but it no longer. So what I'm getting at is that um, even that nuance is misunderstood with the public at large in the United
well,
States. Um, so I hold that it's an antiquated thing.
yeah,
Um,
I do too.
I personally think that it is. There's many
Well,
countries in Europe that, and the reason that I do is because one of the reasons that one of the reasons that I do is that it also propagates or makes something official, and it has always been true. That is the paradigm that we live in. Um, I think that it's too rigid. Like if a person's a Dominican, they do have some significant amount of African ancestry, but they have high amounts also of in there of European ancestry. Um,
mhm.
and appearance is what I get it, but they don't
But
identify as like African American at
uh,
all. Like
most most folks around the world identify as with their culture.
right, right. So there's all sorts of stuff like that. I think it's right, but I don't. I'm not saying that. I'm just putting it out there. I know that we live in the paradigm or reality that we live in, and it's been going the way it's been going, and people, like, as you've mentioned, it just this is what it is. But there is extra information out there that it's quite valid. Um, so you know,
Yeah,
I just happen to
sure.
be studying the stuff for the awkward, weird, strange side road that is the stuff that I've been studying. So
Oh yeah, it leads all
it's
over into some of the weirdest topics you would, you know. Oh man,
I
I
was
gotta.
reading about Hungary. I was reading about a tribe
Mhm,
from the Middle Bronze Age, early to late Bronze Age, a tribe in the flats of 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 Hungary, in a village that has a cemetery. And I was reading that. Just that's how
yeah,
the side roads that
yeah.
it takes me.
Oh yeah, you can go all over the place. You can go all over the place, man.
I was reading the supplementals on
Hmm.
the artifacts that they found in those graves, and the dietary implications
Hmm.
of for whatever. And it, I mean, half of the stuff I forgot what the hell, but at the
Yeah,
time I was investigating that. And it just it's weird stuff.
very
For
weird stuff. We need to go ahead and land the plane. We've been on 2 hours.
all right,
Oh man. So
all right,
no matter where you go, there you are. No matter who you are, there you are. Be nice to people. That's all.
yeah, yeah. I think that if you think about it, I'll say my last bit. Um, Regardless of what we see on online and all the bickering that may happen,
Hmm.
and the assumptions that are made about people
Hmm.
um, from yesteryear, meaning
Yeah.
our generations going back, we know. I feel safe to say that if you return our butts, at least for me, I can go back to the '80s remembering, and into the '70s remembering, but only the latter half of the '70s. Um, we grew up in a much more, or I'll say it this way: the assumptions made about people from before the new arrivals here today and the way they live, it's as if we were practically 1 foot in caveman territory when it comes to um the dignity towards others, um amicable back
Hmm.
and forth with others. There's always outliers, but I think that we were, generally speaking, a very I don't want to sound dumb, but by saying advanced, but a very modern, um, incorporated society with different parts
Hmm.
that enjoyed all sorts of things, from music from different
Hmm.
places to movies to interactions. Maybe some places more than other, but um, there was so it didn't just so happen that we discovered today, if you're a new kid on the block, let's say, that all these evils and such and this and that, or all these misunderstandings and this and that.
Well,
We do keep learning as we grow, but we also have to realize that we didn't start from zero. We are a work in progress. Humanity is,
yeah.
and there's a lot of kindness out there, and good intentioned people, and kind of, regardless of all these. So let's not
Well,
also taint the past dirty either.
well, I guess over and above everything else, I think something that needs to be taught more often is we may be different, but that doesn't mean we're enemies. We're moved way beyond Neolithic man. We're way beyond the Stone Age. Different does not mean threatening. Different does not mean enemies. We may have different cultures. We may be physically different, but that doesn't mean we're enemies. And we got a lot to learn from one another if you sit down, take the time to just give it a shot.
Yeah, yeah. Um, I guess that's a good way to end it. It's a complicated
It
subject, and it
is.
brings
It's
up
complex.
but it's also it also can be very dry, in terms of, like, it is what it is.
Hmm.
This is what there is, and this is what
Hmm.
there's not, and this is and it doesn't have to be overtly, one thing or the other. It's just data points, and then there's the interactions of people.
Yep.
you know all right, well, I think that that was a good way to end it. We go live every Tuesday at 9:30 Eastern, 6:30 Pacific Coast time. This is the Trampled Underfoot podcast show. Now, we do get into all sorts of different types of subjects. Sometimes we go back and touch on one set of subjects, and then sometimes we bring up new things in all areas. Um, we're not we're pretty eclectic, let's just say. Um, so, anyways, we also have a site over on Facebook, Trampled Underfoot Podcast on Facebook, and we have a website, trampledunderfootpodcast.com, and we're sponsored by.
I had to put that down. Harneal Media, your web solution. Look, if you're thinking about getting a website, you got a product or a service to offer to folks. We live in an online world. There's no better way to do it than with a website and a web store. Whether you have a product or service to offer, there's no better place to at least check out than Harneal Media. Steve's a good personal friend of both Eloy and mine, and he will do you right. He's very competitively priced. He knows what he's doing. I don't know how he keeps up with half of the stuff he keeps up with, but he does it, and he does it very well. So there's a link to Harneal Media in every video on this YouTube channel. Do yourself a favor, click that link, go check it out, and have a chat with Steve. He will take care of you. That's Harneal Media, HARNEAL media.com. Sponsor of trampledunderfootpodcast.com.
All right. We're on the cutting edge of what I don't know, but we're
Societal,
sure. What's that?
we're on the cutting edge of societal evolution.
Yeah. It's, oh my goodness. All right. Well, we hope you enjoyed it, folks. We'll be back next week, Tuesday, 9:30 Eastern, 6:30 Pacific. And we wish you well. Do the things that make you happy and be safe. Peace.
Peace.